This is an iconic watch and one you've possibly never even heard of, made by the American firm Bulova, who were founded in the later part of the 19th century. But in the 1960s, they came up with this, the Bulova Astronaut GMT. And I'm going to give you a full review of it and tell you that it's phenomenal value for money today. It's been overlooked. It's a fraction of the cost of a Rolex Submariner and is, in fact, massively undervalued. Hi, I'm David Harper, and as well as getting my teeth into this Bulova Astronaut in a review, I'm going to compare it with a Rolex Submariner from the 1960s and ask and answer the question, is a 60s Bulova Astronaut better than a 60s Rolex Submariner? Let's go and find out. So just take a look at the design of this thing. It screams Cold War adventure and 1960s chic and modernity. So modern, in fact, in its day, it was the world's second and the most successful electric watch. In other words, it runs on a battery. This thing was space-age technology designed to withstand great pressures, high temperatures, and to be the most accurate watch in its day. A big watch in the 1960s, not so big today, of course. It measures 38 millimeters across the case and has this distinctive V shape when looked at from the side. And what I find very visually appealing here is the thickness of the watch. Its height, it stands proud at 13.5 millimeters, including the slightly domed acrylic crystal glass, which in this case is absolutely original. Back to the face. This one has the sunburst silver dial with the black GMT bezel. This is slightly rarer than the black face with the steel bezel. The hands are luminous, as you can see, but with this watch being over 50 years old, you really can't rely on seeing anything in the dark wearing this thing. The most obvious feature lacking on this watch, of course, is the crown. It doesn't have one. The thing that changes the time with this design, unusually, is actually a recessed key located next to the battery. Let's go back to the 1960s when this watch was seen as the most advanced watch in the world. So good, in fact, that the American Air Force and the CIA issued Bulova Astronaut watches to their pilots. And these pilots were flying the super fast, supersonic new breed of spy planes. Pilot watches were worn on the outside of their pressure suits, and it was soon discovered the hard way that ordinary watches were not coping with the extreme temperatures and pressures in these supersonic aircrafts. The Bulova Astronaut, however, was tried and it held up to the extreme testing, and therefore every pilot was supplied with their very own Bulova Astronaut watch, and guess what? They were allowed to keep them. Now, naming this watch the Astronaut, which is pretty amazing, is actually quite misleading because the watch was never designed to go into space. However, NASA did use movements by Bulova, the same movements as in this watch, in a number of their missions, including the Gemini and the Apollo. But the watch was being worn by supersonic pilots, flying at 3 times the speed of sound, so that's around 2,000 miles an hour, and it was also being worn by hypersonic pilots who reached speeds of 4,500 miles an hour and who flew at such heights that the pilots flying them, and who of course were wearing the Bulova Astronauts, qualified for their astronaut wings because they were actually reaching the fringes of space. So, ironically, the name Astronaut for this watch really does apply. And you know that these watches are electric, they're battery powered. But did you know that during the 1960s, Bulova guaranteed that these watches, the Astronauts, would not gain or lose any more than 1 second a day. Now that's quite a quality claim, and you know what? They were right. These watches were incredibly efficient and reliable, and still are today if you maintain them well. But the fascinating thing about this watch is this. Not only are you holding the 1960s, you can hear the 1960s. Let me explain. When you hold a Bulova Astronaut to your ear, there is a definite high-pitched sound, no ticking, something very peculiar to this watch, and it's something to do with the movement. They produced it with this tuning fork, which vibrates at such speeds, it releases this high-pitch noise. And you are listening to the 1960s. And if you're old enough to remember the noise a television would make when you switched the telly off at the end of broadcast and there was nothing else on, there's this high-pitched sound, it's exactly the same. And a funny quirk with this watch is this, that when you place it on certain surfaces, somehow that tuning fork vibrates even louder. The sound of the 60s is sent out into the ether. I'm going to demonstrate it, so watch and listen. You might have to turn the volume up a little bit, but here is the sound of the 1960s. Did you hear that? I really don't know why I find this so absolutely fascinating that it does it. I can occupy myself for hours on end listening to this watch. But anyway, let's get back to how you can date accurately a Bulova. This one is from 1968. Luckily, it's not rocket science. I'll show you how you do it. So simply turn the watch over and there are all the numbers that you need to date this watch. The long number is the Bulova reference number for its model, but the crucial 2 digits are the M and the 8. Now, after 1950, Bulova introduced this really nice and simple 2-digit code with a letter corresponding to the decade that the watch was manufactured and a number giving you the year. So in this case, the date code is M8. M, look it up, stands for 1960s in the world of Bulova, and the 8 stands for the 8th year of the 1960s. So, as I said, it's not rocket science, 1968. So there you have it, the rare and often overlooked Bulova Astronaut watch. But back to the original question I posed right at the beginning of this film. Is this watch better than an equivalent 1960s Rolex Submariner? I think it is. Let me explain my thinking. In 1968, this Bulova Astronaut cost $175. At the same time, a Rolex Submariner cost $215, so there wasn't much in it. Today, however, a 1960s Rolex Submariner might cost you £15,000. A Bulova Astronaut 1968 original you can buy for £1,200. And these really are rare beasts indeed. And those that know watches spot this watch from 100 feet away. They cause an awful lot of interest. People will stop you in the street if you wear this watch. So, based on value for money, rarity, kudos and coolability, the Bulova Astronaut watch blows the Rolex Submariner clean out of the water, and you need to buy one of these before they rocket in price. I'm David Harper. I hope you've enjoyed this film. Please do subscribe, like, make a comment. Until next time, cheerio.